Hello everyone, I'm Sarah, and in my last video, Tragedy in an Instant, how one evening turned into a life-changing nightmare for a witness, I discussed the effect on an eyewitness, sometimes called a third-party witness, who is not a responder. But today I'm going to talk about first responders. But if you do go back to view Tragedy in an Instant, please check out the disclaimer because there are some vivid scenes in it. Again, I want to say thank you for coming in and joining me. Today we pull back the curtain on the hidden impact for DUI tragedies on first responders. We are exploring a world that most people never consider. The emotional, psychological, and even physical toll on those who face the devastation of DUI crashes every day. These are silent witnesses, first responders, cleanup crews, and trauma workers. May not be the victims themselves, but they are undoubtedly affected every time. Their stories, though often unspoken, are crucial to understanding the full scope of how DUI crashes shatter lives. Just imagine, being the first to arrive at a crash site. The chaos hits you immediately. The shattered glass glitters under the flashing lights. The arid smell or scent of gasoline fills the air, or possibly even smoke. And the distant wails of approaching sirens blend with the bystanders. A police officer steps out of their vehicle and surveys the scene. The twisted wreckage of the metal, the haunting silence from one car, and the panic screams from another. Their training kicks in. But no amount of training can shield them the horror of this situation, sometimes daily situation. For paramedics, the race against time is relentless. They've seen the unthinkable: broken bodies, crushed bodies, parents sobbing over lifeless children, and drunk drivers stumbling around unharmed, acting like fools. Obvious to the destruction they've caused. Even when they manage to save their lives, the memories of those they couldn't save linger, appearing in dreams or flashing back during quiet moments. Firefighters rush to extract victims, often cutting through mangled steel to save lives. They work with urgency, as seconds can mean the difference between life and death. However, despite all their efforts, they can't save everyone, like Mike Kinley. He was gone within seconds. First responders face a unique kind of trauma. They repeatedly witness preventable tragedies, see human lives reduced to mere numbers on crash reports, and realize that despite their best efforts, the nightmare continues. I know that Kenley's dad was one of the first responders. He was a criminalist, an expert witness for federal and state court. And when he went out on, in his case, they wouldn't necessarily be this crash scenes, but they would be like homicides. It was tough. The smell of his clothes, the fact that he was really upset, his nightmares at night. I could never touch him. I'd have to touch him on his foot because he'd come up hitting me, swinging. According to the investigative reports and the death certificate, Kenny was gone in seconds. He never had a chance. Kenny was crushed in the front seat of the car as he lay there. Dennis, who was drunk, screamed for help. His car was upside down near the railroad tracks, so close that they had to stop the train. And he was so drunk he didn't even know where he was at. According to what I was told, he didn't even remember getting in the car and driving. He's just a drunk. Yes, he was gone in seconds, without a chance. That burden, that weight of lives lost, is something that these first responders carry long after the end of their shift. I know this because, like I mentioned before, I live with it. Household and handling. I know this also because I had personal contact with an incredible first responder who called both Melissa and me to offer help. He was the one that, when the call came in from the witness that's seen this happen, he was the first responder there. And probably the first one to see my son's body. Crushed body. Now, I know that not only did the eyewitness see this, but so did every first responder. I feel for them and respect them, their work. However, selfish people who drink and drive affect so many lives for years and years to come. Forever. I know I have a life sentence. I know Melissa does too. And other people do too, because my son was loved. And the drunk gets all the rights. But that's unfortunately the way it is. Now let's not forget those who encourage others to drink. They are just as guilty. Now, in some states, you can sue them under the dram law. Texas has such a law, but Nevada, where I live, does not. In fact, they have a law just the opposite, that you cannot sue them, which I will discuss in a future video, the dram law, or the dram shop law. Now, speaking of paying someone must pay for all the first responders. Typically, insurance will pay for the ambulance. What about the other first responders who pay? Who pays for them? Well, in most cases, the cost of the crash cleanup, including the response from the first responders, is typically covered by the at-fault driver's car insurance company through the crash claim. I'm sure they call it an accident claim. I call it a crash. This means the individual driver or their insurance company is ultimately responsible for the cleanup cost, not the first responders themselves. Saying, yes, I believe you can sue the person who actually caused or created the crash. But then too, most of them have no money, or they have so much money they can get out of it. In most cases, well, the local government typically also picks up or covers the cost of crash cleanup, including if nobody can pay for it. In most cases, the local government typically covers the cost of a crash cleanup, including the response from the first responders through taxes. Yes, you have to pay for these drunks too, these drunks. This means the responsibility falls on the public and not directly on individuals involved in the crash. Even if they don't have insurance or money, the at-fault driver may be liable for additional costs depending on the jurisdiction and severity of the accident. But the initial cleanup by first responders is usually not billed directly to them. Of course not. The criminal gets all the rights. How many lives are they affected? Just because they wanted to go out and get drunk. And he was drunk. When I flew to Lubbock, I met a fantastic first responder. In fact, it was the first responder, the officer that was sent out to the crash site. He said Kenley reminded him of himself because of the climbing ropes they found. Both were climbers. Former military personnel. I had a military sign put on the car. And the same age. And Kenley had also been a supervisor for Santa Clara County's COM 911 in California. In fact, he was the youngest one ever to be put over 50 people in his early 20s. He was a good kid and a smart kid. At this time, they were both 39 years old. Well, actually, I take that back. They were 40 years old. Kenley had just turned 40 about 5 days before that. Now, let's focus on those who come after the sirens fade. Let's see what they do. Like the cleanup crews. Step into the scene with a different, often-look duty to clear away the physical remnants of chaos. Imagine arriving at a crash site in the cold light of dawn, facing the remnants of a shattered world. Personal belongings, they were strewed everywhere. On the road. And since my son was crushed, I have no idea what else. But I do know that Marshall, his dog, was scattered on the road. Pieces of lives that will never be the same. All because Dennis Rodriguez Abeta Jr. wanted to go out and get drunk. Which was normal for him. Which is normal for most drunks. Now these workers scrub away blood stains and sweep up shards of glass, knowing that every piece of debris once held meaning for someone. In this case, me and my son. They are tasked with restoring order, but the reality that they remain with is emotional disorder. Now, clean up our crash is not just a physical task, it's also a mental struggle. The knowledge that they are scrubbing away the evidence of someone's lost moments or a family's nightmare weighs heavily on that, I'm sure. And yet they do not work quietly. And yet they work quietly, almost invisibly, so the rest of us can move on with our day, unaware of the trauma that they have absorbed. In my son's case, as you can see, it was in pieces. And I honestly do not know what's left after the coroner came. I have the photos on a flash drive, but still cannot look at them. For these silent witnesses, the psychological toll was real and awful, debilitating. First responders and cleanup crews experienced trauma not as the one-time event, but as a relentless series of emotional blows. They often suffer from anxiety, PTSD, or burnout. Some replay scenes in their minds, while others grow just numb. I know my husband, well, I told you about that before. Driving past familiar intersections or hearing the screech of tires, I know can trigger flashbacks with me, and I wasn't even there. Now, I want to talk about the different people who do show up briefly. Law enforcement officers. Now, they can be police officers, they can be highway patrol, or state troopers, or the sheriff's deputies. Each one of them have different duties to perform. For instance, the highway patrol and state troopers respond highways on interstates and assist in traffic management, but essentially they all do about the same thing. Emergency medical service, well, that's EMS, paramedics. We know what that's all about. Also, EMTs, emergency medical technicians, which help them. Sometimes flight medics. Firefighters, the local fire department, personnel respond to vehicle extractions. Now, this may contain hazardous materials, fuels, toxin leaks, chemicals, and, even deceased bodies can create hazards too. You have crisis intervention teams. You have other specialists, accident reconstruction specialists. They analyze the scene, determine the dynamics of the crash. Like I said, hazard response unit, handle road cleanup, and answer other immediate dangers. These professionals work collaboratively to secure the scene, assist survivors, investigate the incident, and manage its aftermath, and usually end up testifying in court, along with private hired expert witnesses that the defense attorney will hire to dispute what they come up with. There's another problem there. What's even more troubling is the stigma surrounding mental health in these professions. Many people are reluctant to seek help, fearing they will not be perceived as weak or unfit for duty. And unfortunately, they silently bear the weight of trauma because society depends on that. They must prepare reports and, like I said, testify in court. And sometimes even on their days off. And listen, these defense attorneys can be nasty and go after these people. The trauma doesn't exist in a vacuum. It affects families, communities, and those sworn to protect and serve. Like I said, I know this because Kenneth's father worked as a criminalist, an expert witness for state and federal courts. I know, like I said, I know what happened to him. When we hear about DUI crashes, we often focus on the victims and the drunks, which is important. However, we must also remember the silent witnesses. They are the ones who need to keep going to process this unspeakable pain and to return to work the next day knowing that they may face it again any minute, any time. Today, I have highlighted those who witness DUI tragedies but rarely discuss the toll that these situations take on them. As I conclude this video, I urge you to reflect on the ripple effects of every choice made behind the wheel and talk to people and tell them not to drink and drive. And to the silent witness, I see you, I hear you, and I thank you. To everyone listening, let's work together to ensure that fewer people endure the trauma, preventable tragedies. These are tragedies that should never happen. That person should never have gotten behind a wheel and driven. Thank you for turning in to listen to me. Until next time, drive safely. Please drive safely. And tell others to drive safely too. This is the holiday season. And there's going to be many people that are going to be suffering like I am next year. There's going to be many people who won't be here next year. But again, thank you. I am Sarah Rainey. I am the proud mother of Dr. Kelly Jean Rainey, who lost his wife to a drunk driver by the name of Dennis Rodriguez Abeda Jr. And I am not an attorney, just a mother. Thank you.